We're in Drumshanbo, County Leitrim, our final day off the beaten craic in the Hidden Heartlands, and I'm John Lee.
And I'm Martin Nutty. And in this concluding episode of our Off the Beaten Craic road trip, we were sad to see the actual end of the trip itself, but there was also some delight in that it should happen in the little town of Drumshanbo in County Leitrim. Why? Because it allowed us to reconnect with PJ Rigney of the Shed Distillery, world famous for its gunpowder gin. But also, the visit enabled us to explore the deeper story of that town itself. It's a story of recovery from hard economic times. Drumshanbo was a town hit by hard times in the 80s and 90s. Many small towns never recover from the shutdown of a major employer. Drumshanbo had to survive 3 shutdowns, yet it survived, and there lies the story that is somewhat universal and can provide hope for other small towns slammed by devastating closures. John and I met with 2 men well equipped to tell that story. Cllr Enda McGloin, chairman of the Drumshanbo Community Council, and Fergal McPartland, manager of the food hub at Drumshanbo, where we recorded this part of our episode. We're sitting in the town of Drumshanbo, a small town in Leitrim, probably about 1,000 people, and we're in what was once the old Laird's jam factory. Laird's is no longer with us, and that caused a crisis in Drumshanbo, along with the close down of the Arigna coal mine, which is local here, with 2 major employers in this locale. And I'm delighted to welcome 2 gentlemen that are behind the revival of Drumshanbo by making it a food hub. So with that, I'd like to welcome Fergal McPartland and Enda McGloin. Gentlemen, welcome to you both to Irish Stew Podcast.
Thank you very much.
How do you look at an abandoned factory that specialized quite successfully for many years in producing jams and marmalades, but business changed, that company went away? How do you look at this space and see opportunity?
I suppose we had the asset here in the factory. We were lucky enough, there were some people who could look into the crystal ball, and I'd name particularly Fergal's dad, Noel McPartland, who was an executive here with Laird Foods. He was in the export area. He travelled the world selling jams and marmalades to various markets across the world, and he was in contact with a lot of food producers, and he could see the potential for a base here for many of those producers. The big issue for many was the capital cost of starting a food enterprise, namely the food grade infrastructure that's required. So he approached the developer who had purchased the factory and the grounds around it, that here was an asset, a factory that could be turned into smaller, minute food production units. And he, along with others, I wasn't involved at that time, but he, along with others, negotiated with various funders to develop the concept of a food hub. And the premises was divided into a number of units. And it was probably, as Fergal was saying, 2004 it started, and then a couple of years later it was ready to be marketed. But the first couple of years was a struggle. We had hit just the wrong time in terms of the economic cycle. Things were difficult, money wasn't very plentiful, and the appetite for investment was poor. But that didn't put us off. We met an awful lot of people, some who I suppose just couldn't get the finance, others who hadn't just done enough research in developing. But we had 1 or 2 companies that were here, but we're only really about, that's say 20-25%. So maybe Fergal can take it from there then.
Just one question to make sure I understand. Are you saying the fact that this was a food production facility made it much easier for you then to create this new kind of food production facility here?
Yeah, well, I think the fact that it was a food production facility itself, you had access in terms of the size, the factory itself, we access to all the services were here, high-grade electricity connection, water, sewage, and all of that. But I suppose as we found out when we went to develop the factory, there was a higher requirement from environmental and health regulations particularly around the effluent, and then to develop each unit into a particular food grade finish. We found that probably cost us a substantial amount more than we had anticipated. But at the same time, it was here, it was well located on the Carrick Road outside of Drumshanbo. Yes, I suppose it could have been turned to many things. It could have been knocked and maybe houses built at the time. But as I say, it was the determination of Noel McPartland, people like Sean Nolan, who were former executives here and who pushed the idea against the odds and really got in. Orla Casey was a lady that was involved here, as well as a person who was very good in terms of sourcing finance and wrote up a lot of the applications for funding. So collaboratively, they were able to ensure we got a substantial amount of funding. And it was based on the fact that we were reuniting what was the biggest employer in Drumshanbo with the potential to do that. And we actually achieved that today. In fact, more are employed here now than would have been then at the height when the factory was at its top production.
You launched this effort into the teeth of the financial crisis. Talk to us about maintaining optimism in the face of this difficulty and even staying afloat. Okay, so I assume that there was an entity structured which is going out and saying, let's locate people, let's vet people that are capable of doing a food startup, right? So you're going through that process, but in the meantime, you have to pay your own bills to stay afloat. So how did that work?
It was hugely challenging. I suppose the whole genesis for this goes back to the early 90s, and not only did the factory here, Laird's close, the Arigna mines closed, the coal burning power station closed, which was also a huge employer at the same time. The shoe factory in the 80s, it closed. Everyone remembers the 80s were particularly difficult. There was a lot of emigration, a lot of young people left because simply there was no employment. So the genesis of this is in that period in the early 90s, late 80s, early 90s. And as Enda explained, the factory was here and there was a huge frustration that what was a state-of-the-art factory had only opened its doors in 1982, so it had lasted less than a decade. And it was one of the most modern in Western Europe when it was built at that time. So for it to only last 8 years and then be closed, there was huge frustration locally that the jam business, which had been associated with Drumshanbo going back a century, had been the major employer. The Laird family, through a whole variety of enterprises, not just the jam factory, had been the major employers in the town. So for that just to be lost overnight, and yet the asset of the factory was lying here and it was idle and it was contributing nothing to the local economy. So that was a huge source of frustration. And that original committee of Noel and Sean Nolan and Pádraig McLaughlin and Rosaleen Keelty and Joseph McManus and those people who were basically a small cohort of retired people with the best interests of the town at heart, said, listen, we have to do something about this. And the battle to first of all acquire the site and the factory, which went on for years and years, because obviously as a voluntary community group, Drumshanbo Community Council, which was the body that was trying to achieve this, didn't have the resources. They had no money, didn't have the resources to achieve their goal. So a very long, drawn-out process that began probably in the mid-90s and went on until about 2003, I think, when eventually the entire site here, I think it was a 12-acre site where the factory was located, was bought for housing development as part of that whole early 2000s coming into what was known as the Celtic Tiger. And planning permission for about 50 or 60 houses was granted. And the factory, thankfully, was probably too large to demolish. Maybe the cost of demolishing and clearing the site put off the developer. An engagement began and went on for several years, and eventually the community acquired a 99-year lease on the factory. And based on that, then, we were able to access funding. The core principle was to attract jobs and enterprise into Drumshanbo and the surrounding areas, which had been decimated with job losses. And the community just felt, look, we've had enough. We're going to try and take a hand here and do something ourselves. If we're waiting for central government or whoever else to come in, it's not going to happen. The chances of a large company just deciding overnight we're going to locate in rural Leitrim, which is the smallest of the 32 counties with the least population. And we were always told we were off the beaten track and our location was a big disadvantage. That's what traditionally we would have been told. But I'm glad to say that we've been able to flip that and turn it into an advantage. Once we'd acquired the factory, we were then out trying every avenue at the time to access funding for the capital for fitting it out. And I suppose you had asked, John, initially, was the fact that it was a food factory an advantage? I think that original committee made it an advantage in that they hung their hat on food production. There was a lot of people saying, oh, you should do this, you should turn it into this, that or the other. But they said, no, there's a history and a tradition of food production in Drumshanbo and the wider area. There's a pool of labour there because every family had somebody who worked in the factory. And so as not to completely discard that, but rather to build on it. So they decided this is going to be a food project. And in those early years, while we were struggling to fill the space, we had lots of offers from people that wanted it for storage or for joinery or for lots of things because they wanted the space. But we said, no, this is a food project. So it turned into the food hub. And that initial period was difficult. We were able to access funding, and there was funding around at that time, which is no longer available. So we were lucky in the sense that we'd hit a fertile period in terms of funding. So, for example, the International Fund for Ireland, which some of your listeners may be familiar with, which provided funding for rural communities in Ireland back at that time throughout the 90s and early 2000s. We accessed significant funding, about €500,000 in funding from the International Fund for Ireland. Enterprise Ireland have been a great supporter from the start. Leader, which is another European funding initiative which comes through the local authority, Leitrim County Council. And then there were also a number of cross-border funding avenues available to us, which again are no longer there. So while all this money was there, it was probably about €2 million at the time, which was a very significant amount of money in the early 2000s. And we were able to fit out the entire factory. And I suppose we had the choice, do we fit everything out or do we do the sensible thing, which any sensible committee would have said, listen, we'll just fit out this little bit and we'll see if we can get a tenant for it and we'll fill it and then we'll see how it goes and play it safe and maybe go again and do it over a period. But we says, no, we're going all in, and we put all our chips on the table and we spent the whole 2 million and we fitted out the entire factory. When it was ready to open in 2007, we had a very modern, fully fitted out food grade factory, but we had no tenants. I suppose we probably didn't think about it too much at the time. We were just in the middle of this. It became, as they say at the time, we were not for profit, and it was just as well we were not for profit because there were no profits and there was no turnover even to generate profits or anything else. So we stuck at it, and we had one company that came in the early stages, two guys, Joe Scanlon and Stephen O'Dowd, who started a ready meals business in 2007. And they were our first tenant. And then after that, we had a whole litany of small companies that came and went, and a lot of startups that, by their very nature, they require a lot of resourcing and they require time and nurturing. And we did all that, and not all of them survived. So we spent a lot of time working with companies that unfortunately didn't turn out to be viable businesses.
Can I ask you about one that really has turned out to be a viable business? I know you have several others in this facility, but people from all over the world know one of the brands that come from here. That name Drumshanbo may ring a bell, but they might know it more as that Irish Gunpowder Gin.
So Drumshanbo Irish Gunpowder Gin. Pat and Denise Rigney, the owners of the Shed Distillery, were looking for a location for a distillery. And they were looking in several locations, and I suppose it was a serendipity, but anyway, they ended up in Drumshanbo at the end of 2013 while we were really struggling to fill our nascent food hub. So we had a lot of space and we had very few tenants at that stage. And Pat Rigney arrived, and we didn't know Pat at all. We'd never heard of Pat, but in the drinks business, he was very well known and he had a real pedigree. And he had this idea. And at this stage, while we started out many years previously, we had been told, if you convert 1 out of every 10 inquiries you have, you'll be doing very well. And we said, God, no, we'll do much better than that. We're clued in and we know what we're doing here. By the time Pat had come to us, I think we had 4 tenants, small-scale tenants, and we'd had over 50 serious inquiries. So we weren't even striking 1 in 10 at that stage. So when Pat came, we had talked to so many people and we were a little bit jaded, and there was fatigue had set in, because you have to remember this was a voluntary committee. This wasn't a well-resourced, dynamic, commercially savvy team. This was guys who just were doing their best to get the place open, attract some jobs in. And I'd love to say that we had a brilliant strategic vision of where we were going, and we'd planned this meticulously, and we knew exactly what we were doing. But it just happened by chance. So Pat arrived and he told us within the first 2 weeks that, yeah, I'm going to locate here. He says, I like the look of the place. And he had a vision which I suppose at that stage we didn't see, but he told us a number of things when he came. He said he was going to create a world famous, an international brand in Drumshanbo. And as I said, we'd heard a lot of promises before. So we said, oh yeah, sure you are, Pat, yeah. I'm going to create a minimum of 100 jobs. Oh yeah, that's great. That's just what we were hoping for, yeah. Well done. He said, I'm going to build a visitor attraction that will attract over 30,000 people in the first year. So we were looking at each other and saying, God, this sounds wonderful, but we were doubters. We didn't believe, but this was a whole different scale. So we went along with it and we said, look, sure, we've tried everyone else, so we'll give this man a go. But it became apparent very early on that Pat really and Denise, they really knew what they were doing. And they had a vision and they had a plan, and they felt that they could coexist in a social enterprise, which is what we were. And as it turned out, we couldn't have imagined then that initially this was a whiskey distillery. So the Shed began distilling its first whiskey in December 2014. And like all small distilleries, while you're waiting for your whiskey to mature, you have to develop other brands, and that's where the gin came in. And again, it wasn't a random thing, because I know Pat told us gin is the coming thing at the moment. So he developed that, I think, in 2015, and he was in at the ground floor. But the whole marketing, the presentation, the bottle, everything, it just took off. Initially, Drumshanbo appeared in very small letters on the label. But over time, and Pat would tell you this, especially internationally, there was a bit of curiosity about Drumshanbo, and is that a real place, or does that exist? Where is it? And it's an odd sounding name. And so in that initial period, Drumshanbo then became bigger on the label. What's good for the brand is good for Drumshanbo and vice versa. And we've worked very well together. It's been a real partnership over the last 10 years, and it's been very exciting to see. And it's really taken us to a place that we could not have foreseen 10 years ago. And so to bring us right up to date, we started out trying to create jobs. So we have 200 jobs here on this site today, spread across 7 companies. So we've overachieved in the sense that we were looking to get 10 companies to create 10 jobs each at that initial period. And it's also given us the confidence and the ambition to build a second and refurbish a second derelict factory on the other side of town, which is ready to open now next month. And one of the companies which had outgrown their space here in the food hub, we're not exactly an incubator, but for incubators, you want to see your companies come in, grow and move on to, and so they've done that, but we didn't want to lose their jobs from the town. Paul Mulligan, who owns Chef in a Box, he bought the business from Joe Scanlon and Stephen Dowd back over 10 years ago, and he's brought it on to the next level. So we're wishing him every success, and we hope he flourishes. I know there'll be more jobs on top of the 50 odd jobs he has at the moment. He's going to develop over the next 18 months. There's a lot of very exciting things that he can do there that he can't do here. In that sense, it's been a great success. But again, it's all voluntary work. It's community owned. We're in the healthy position. I'm not saying we're making a lot of money, but we make a healthy surplus here every year, and that's reinvested back in this site and also reinvested in other projects around the town and in the locality.
Just a point I want to make on that, I suppose when we initially got the funding, we had a big shortfall in terms of the capital. So effectively what we had to do was be very prudent. And the people that we had on our board as an executive, someone like Joseph McManus, who is retired from his business, he had a retail shop here, supermarket, and he was treasurer along with Sean Owen all those years. And while we had a precarious at times because we had large loans coupled with a kind of a limited income, that only for his prudence and his management, and I suppose this is where you bring people from the community in to try and manage the project. But his expertise in all of that brought us to a point, as Fergal has alluded to there, we've had a very good, strong rental income in the last couple of years that has buoyed us up. But I think it's important to say that when you bring in different elements of a community, volunteers, and they bring their own level of expertise, the combination then achieves success in that sense.
I suppose the experience of Drumshanbo is not an unusual experience in terms of towns losing major employers. Looking back now over these years, and you alluded to it, Fergal, that you thought you were going to be much more successful in attracting businesses. In other words, your hit rate was meant to be 1 out of every 10, which proved not to be the case. Looking back now, is there points where you said, God, if I'd only known this or I'd only known that to hit on a higher yield? What would you advise people if people come to you and say, okay, I want to do what you guys did in Drumshanbo?
Yeah, look, there are things. We made a ton of mistakes along the way, and we've shared our story with over 40 groups from around Ireland, and we tell them the warts and all that we didn't do certain things. But I suppose it wasn't a mistake, but it took us a long time to discover we were maybe on the wrong track. We spent too long in the early years trying to develop startup businesses. And startups are risky, and they take a lot of work, they take investment, they take man hours to work with them. From when we opened at the end of 2007 right through to maybe 2012, 2013, the long 4 or 5 years battling to get the company to come in and they do well, and then they wouldn't last and we go on to the next one. But we really should have targeted established companies who were looking to expand earlier than we did. We didn't realize what the biggest asset that we had was. We had the infrastructure in place, we were planning ready, we had all our licenses, we had 3-phase power, we had all those things, and there were companies at the time who were maybe in locations that didn't have those advantages and were looking for them, and were looking at greenfield sites, and we could offer them a facility where they could be up and running in about 3 months, not having to worry about all that regulatory red tape. And again, when we were talking about the distillery coming in, and Joseph Gillooly, now the CEO of Leitrim County Council, would have been hugely helpful in terms of fast-tracking. A lot of entrepreneurs in particular, they don't have time for red tape and regulation. They're doers. They find that very frustrating and a huge obstacle. When we met Pat and Denise initially, and then Joseph came in very early on, and the local council came in, and there was nothing untoward done, but it was just a reassurance that every available resource and support will be offered to make this happen in a timely fashion. You're not going to be held up for 6 months waiting for replies on things that, you know, that should take 3 weeks. So once Pat got that reassurance, and once he saw that everyone was in and everyone was on the same page, I think things happened very quickly, and that wouldn't have happened without the support of Leitrim County Council. We've gone on then. After the success here, we were able to partner then with the local authority on other projects, and you build up that relationship and you have a track record, and they know that, look, these guys have delivered before. There's a good chance that they'll do it again. We're not taking a punt on a complete unknown, obviously, because they have to protect taxpayer money, so it has to be invested wisely. So we'd like to think that we've delivered on that investment, and we've facilitated a major amount of government and European investment into a rural area, and it's been done properly. And I suppose the proof in the pudding now is that there's probably a payroll into the local economy of over €5 million per annum, which wouldn't be there otherwise. There's lots of ancillary or support businesses that are getting work through here. There's transport, and there's our local plumbers and electricians and services. That's all been hugely beneficial.
I was going to say we're lucky here in a way in that over the last couple of years, coupled with the investment here on this campus, we were close by the Shannon Earn River Network, or the canal network, and Waterways Ireland, through government support, have invested in the Blue Way, which is basically a walking track or walking path. And the trailhead starts at the local hotel at the Loch Allen, and moves its way up into acres. And then we have this floating boardwalk, which a lot of people like to come and see. And then that moves its way up onto Leitrim Village, and the Leitrim County Council have further plans to develop it in. Really what I'm saying is that's another added attraction. We've had a significant investment in walkways. The big benefit I see was the investment in visitor location. The distillery has one of the highest level of visitor numbers here. Any day I go in and I look around, I suppose I only know about 10% of the people that are there. The rest of them are all visitors. For the first time ever, I've witnessed American visitors coming here in significant numbers. That never was the case, other than natives who would return to see their home place. And then they have the added attraction of the walkways, as I mentioned. Our tourism infrastructure has developed alongside it. The response from some of the local businesses, we have a company called Ginny's Bakery. You see a picture of the couple behind. They set up lovely tea rooms alongside the Blue Way, and then they have a food element. They have a local bakery. So we're very lucky in Drumshanbo because we're able to use that seed of the distillery here, and beyond that we have the Blue Way to create a tourism destination. We're only 8 miles from Carrick-on-Shannon, and our tourism numbers have improved drastically alongside what Fergal's alluded to there in terms of the food production and the jobs coming from that. We were lucky in many respects, but we were able to build on that original development.
As we get close to wrapping up here, how do people who might be interested in being part of this food hub, how would they contact you? What would be the first steps? Where do they go if they want to get involved in what's happening here?
We have the Drumshanbo Community Council is our entity. We're a company, and our details are on the web. And as I say, Fergal manages a lot of our day-to-day activities. I'm a local representative. I'm always happy to help anyone who wants to do a similar development, try and advise them as best we can. We've had hundreds of visits here. Literally, Fergal usually is the lead person that goes and explains, like what he has done in this podcast, about the origins, the ideas, and I suppose all of the various hiccups and the warts and all type of scenario. Sometimes it might be hard to replicate an idea in a very similar fashion in another location, but we're lucky in the sense that we can explain to people our challenges over the last number of years and be able to tell them, maybe do this, but don't do that type of stuff. So we're easily accessible, we're contactable. As I say, once you Google Drumshanbo and the Community Council, we'd be happy to talk to anybody.
Yeah, I think it's warts, as you put it, mistakes, errors, failures. The learnings from those can be really powerful. And the old Newton line of, I have seen so far because I have stood on the shoulders of giants, applies. With that, I'd like to say thank you to both Fergal McPartland and to Enda McGloin for giving us an insight on the success of the Drumshanbo Food Hub. I think there's lessons to be learned here and understood that even in the darkest of times, when you have true community spirit, people willing to pitch in, that things can get better as long as you got everybody's shoulder to the wheel. Yeah. So congratulations to you both.
Thanks.
Great story.
It's been a delight.
Thank you.
To talk to you both.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.
For your interest. Yeah, thank you.
It's only taken us 20 years to do it.
20 years to be an overnight success.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, almost a year after our first episode with PJ Rigney, we get to dig a little deeper into the curious mind behind Drumshanbo whiskey, Irish Gunpowder Gin, and other fine distilled products, because we get to visit the Shed Distillery where the magic happens. We get to sample some fine Drumshanbo single pot whiskey. We get to explore his eccentric, eclectic laboratory where all these ideas germinate. But for the conversation itself, Martin and I are back in church for the second time on this trip, a Methodist church that had fallen into disuse, revived as a new community center and local asset by our guest, Pat Rigney.
So, since the last time we talked, what's new from the curious mind of PJ Rigney?
Gosh, I suppose we have acquired the local Methodist church here in Drumshanbo. And
Where we're sitting right now?
Yeah, which was under a bit of pressure and potentially was going into dilapidation. So We've restored it to its glory, and we've added some new extra things into the church, and that's now a community space here in Drumshanbo for the community here, but also we obviously can use it for visitors when they come to visit us. So we're very excited about that. Our nature reserve is very much up and running now. It's 80 acres, and we've just done a pairing with the Panda Reserve with the National Panda Park in China. We had a number of the Panda Guardians here 4 weeks ago.
What's a Panda Guardian?
It's somebody basically who looks after the pandas. They don't physically go near them, but they monitor them. They ensure that they're okay, and if there is an issue, they will intervene in terms of health. But these pandas are out in the wild, so we have a connection with them, and we have a panda ceramic bottle for Drumshanbo Gunpowder Irish Gin that generates some cash for them. And our business is growing around the world. We're creating new connections. We have a new connection with Bruno Van Zan in Italy, the number one bartender in the world. We've created a new expression with Fig and Laurel, and we created that with him. But overall, we're just pushing forward, making sure that we look after our team, our markets, our consumers who are absolutely critical to us. And probably the next thing that you'll hear is that we've expanded our whiskey distillation, more than doubling the output. And that's very much focused on single pot still, and an area that we're very excited about. We've just returned from Whiskey Live in Paris, which is a very cool show where we got great endorsement for the quality of our single pot still. And we're very close to releasing our first 10-year-old, which is a real milestone for us. And we're very proud of it because we only sell here what we make. So we've never brought in third-party product. So we've had to wait all of that time to get to 10.
So the Panda thing is a little intriguing. And of course, the base product in your gin, your original flagship gin, originates from China, the gunpowder tea. What's the thinking there? Because obviously this is an enormous market. You've got 1.6 billion people in China. Is that a big gin market, or is that
it's an emerging gin market. I guess what's interesting for us is, first of all, we have a great love affair with China and the Chinese culture. We obviously have a key ingredient, gunpowder tea, in our Drumshanbo Gunpowder Irish Gin, part of the 12 botanicals. It's where the story started. But we do have good relationships there, and this is more about friendship with China. And building those relationships is a very important part of sustaining a business relationship in China. So it's good for us, it's good for them. And I had the privilege of visiting Chengdu last November with the support of the embassy here, the Chinese embassy, and meeting with the Green Sichuan Foundation, who we collaborated with, I suppose, collaboration, sponsorship, if you want to call it that. And we got to meet the pandas, which was almost a religious experience to see these incredible animals. And
What kind of setting were you encountering them?
we didn't actually physically get into the national park where they roam freely. We were in a park outside Chengdu where it's more a breeding area and an area of study of pandas. And so we saw them in that environment. But for us, that was pretty special.
When you're talking about China and the gunpowder tea, I have this vision of a kind of modern Silk Road of all these kinds of ingredients making their way across the world and arriving here in Drumshanbo, County Leitrim, and all these trucks arriving with these cases of exotic flavorings and scents and herbs. Does that resonate with you at all?
Yeah, that's broadly how it arrives, and probably arrives by DHL now. But it's
Not by a camel? Or
not by camel, but that's broadly how it all comes together, and that's certainly the feeling that you get. And part of what we're trying to create is a brand that has many different layers to it. It's very authentic, but it's also very interesting. It's exciting. There's a bit of magic. And then when you participate in the brand, that you go on that journey as well, and you get to feel like you've been to China, or you've been to India, or whatever it might be. And that's all part of the experience.
We had the pleasure of talking to you before. We got a lot of your story in an earlier episode, but on this trip, we are really interested in what the listener will encounter when they come here. How will they experience arriving at the Shed Distillery, coming in? What are they going to encounter and experience?
I guess first of all, we'd love people to come. We're in a rural town in northwest Ireland. I hope when they drive up the little hill and see the Shed Distillery in front of them that they will say, wow, my God, that is really something I've never seen before. And we hope that they have a really uplifting experience, a really interesting experience while they're here, and that they feel the sense of passion and community and excitement around our brand and obviously the journey that I've taken. We're very proud of what we have here. We have a great experience through the distillery and the story of the brand. We also have a wonderful restaurant, cafe, shop and bar, but certainly the feedback we get that it's a very uplifting experience, even in the wintertime. My late father said to me the first time he came here to see it, and he was quite ill at the time, and he was quite, I suppose, from that generation that were a little austere, and he said to me, which was unusual, he said to me, son, this is a really spiritual place. And he took the words out of my mouth for once, because I didn't expect something like that, but he actually meant it. And people do say it's a really special place.
I was struck, I think, the first time we talked, not really appreciating the full spectrum of products that you have available. The flagship bottle that most people are familiar with, this beautiful blue bottle. But I was struck by the number of various ceramic bottles that you have now. And I'm not sure if that's just the last couple of years or I just hadn't encountered. But talk to us about that branding. Why ceramic as opposed to the beautiful glass bottles? And the ceramic bottles are gorgeous too, just because people have come into my apartment and they've looked at that and they said, that's it. What is that? And I said, it's gin. But it's gin. And they look at it, that's a gin bottle? I said, yes. It just really pops to people.
Well, I think part of what we're trying to do is to take the brand almost outside the gin category. We are a gin, but we're competing in a very, very large drinks market. So I think the ceramic bottles and all of that takes it outside, and some of the variants that you saw take it outside. So we like to think it's bigger than gin. Also, a lot of our consumers are very interested in gift giving, and we provide that option for them. Ceramic has a connection with China, and that's where it was inspired. And we have very deep relationships there where we create these ceramic bottles, which are really special. And of course, they become collectibles and they live long into the future for other uses. So it's probably a whole myriad of things. But part of enjoying our brand is that it would always be surprising you, exciting you, that you always find something new. And that's part of what we're trying to do.
Speaking of the ceramic bottles, but really everywhere in the experience of the Shed Distillery, I'll just say I studied art history in college, and one area was iconography. And you have produced such an iconography around your brand. You can read the bottles. You can read a story from the design, from the choice of using some Chinese characters on one bottle to the OM alphabet on another bottle. Everything is so intentional, and like you said, many layers to this.
We're obviously famous for storytelling in Ireland, and our brand is continually telling a story. And what our consumers like is that every time they look at it, they see something new. While it's very authentic, if you actually look at the way it's put together, and some of it actually, you could argue, doesn't make sense. But isn't that why it's attractive? And that's why it's interesting. That's certainly the feedback we get from our customers. We also have a lot of what I would call fans who have a deep connection with the brand, what we stand for, how we do things. And obviously they're very important to us in spreading the gospel in a church.
Now, as I recall the last time we talked, which is a year and a half, maybe 2 years ago, you referred to the fact in the drinks market that things were contracting, that the business climate was getting more difficult. In the intervening period, how have things shaped up just from an overall perspective in this business? And how has your brand experience been as a player in that landscape?
Yeah, it's very interesting. I've been in the industry for over 40 years. I have privileged to work for the larger companies, and obviously this is the love of our lives. I've never seen the industry go through such flux, if you want to call it that, and change and challenge. The larger companies are finding it heavy going. for the first time ever, I think, at quite a level. And then the smaller companies would be finding it difficult in terms of just getting to market, cash and all that kind of stuff. I'm pleased to say that we are in growth, maybe not growing at the same rate as we were, but we are working so hard to ensure that we continue to grow, we continue to thrive. But that means that we have to make sure that we really focus on our customer, our consumer. And there is a realignment in the market, and there are going to be less brands. And we need to make sure that we're in the shake-up for those that come out the other side. So we've just come back from a number of trade exhibitions. We're pretty buoyed up by them. But as I always say to our team, it's the decisions that we made 2 years ago are the decisions that they're actually driving us now. So whatever decisions we make now, they're going to drive us in 12, 18 months' time. So we need to be continually focused on our customer, exciting, delighting them, working hard, and making sure that we stay humble and hungry.
Those decisions aren't just driving the business and delighting the customers. They're having a tremendous impact on this town. And could you talk about how you thread this business into the community and the kinds of impacts that this business, which has put Drumshanbo on the map in many ways?
Yeah, we're obviously very proud of the impact we've had, but we have to stay, as I said earlier, humble and hungry to keep going. But we started here, we had one employee. We're located at a social enterprise, so we're very much part of the community. And the community are very supportive, they're like our guardian angels. So we all work together for the common good. We've put everything back into the business. We're all on a mission to make this a long-term project. We're here 10 years now. Daughter Roisin is very much ensconced in the business. In time, we hope that she will take up the mantle and drive the business on to the next level. But this is a very unusual, very special place because there are a number of people within the community here that are very involved in ensuring that the community comes first. And we're very much aligned with them. That's the reason we came here in the first place.
Earlier, we were out on the Jackalope Trail learning about the experience on an e-bike. So that's part of what you're involved with here that connects into your mission?
Yeah, whether it's hotels locally, shops, all the suppliers for materials, transport, electricians, carpenters, it all feeds in here. But obviously we need to keep our feet on the ground, particularly in the current climate, and make sure that we continue to serve the community.
Obviously, Drumshanbo is known primarily as a gin producer, but John and I had the pleasure of tasting your flagship whiskey. I will say I was delighted by it.
Thank you.
How do you balance those two very different product lines? Because there could be a situation of a certain confusion, potentially, because you have Drumshanbo gin, that's how I see it, but it's not, in truth.
Yeah, I think Drumshanbo Gunpowder Irish Gin, it has the gunpowder in the name, it's really developed a very distinct profile. Our single pot still under Drumshanbo, it's quietly growing, it's doing incredibly well, and it has quite a following. I think that's just how we communicate over time. They're going to be two distinct parts of the liquor store or the bar, and they're very different offerings, but the Shed Distillery, I suppose, is the common thread, the curious mind. But it's something we're aware of, and it's something we just need to make sure that we work hard at to make that there isn't confusion. But so far, I don't think there is.
Oh, I know you have another product, a sausage tree vodka, and I'll just give you a friend of mine came up to me. I'll mention his name, David Rosenthal. That way he has to listen to the episode. But he just came up to me and said, "Hey, have you ever heard of this Irish vodka? It's really great, sausage tree. I had it the other day, and it was really great." So anyway, unsolicited endorsement.
Yeah, it's a very pure vodka. The sausage tree fruit is a purifier from Africa that we bring in with Irish nettles and grain. Very soft, very easy to drink, very pure. Copy line is like nature's no place for the weak, which is funny. But it's a really good quality vodka, so I'm delighted he enjoyed it.
Do you ever get the chance to sit in the Jackalope Cafe or one of the other areas of the Shed and just observe people as they come in and go out and what they're talking about and how they're reacting?
Yeah, from time to time, and they often come up to me and they want to engage, which is great. Yeah, I actually get energy by just being in and around our wonderful distillery and all it has to offer. I can't be here all the time. But if I was ever having a bad day, I know where to go if I come here, because people are very positively disposed towards what we've created here in Drumshanbo. That gives us encouragement to keep going.
Did I hear something about a brewery?
Not here, but there's a brewery in Dublin called Changing Times, and that is owned by a number of Dublin publicans who sell the beer they brew their own beer, and I chair that company. That's my connection with that.
Well, that kind of gets us into what's next that you can tell us about. Besides the new church,
To be honest, what's next is really to double down on what we have and make sure that we add new markets, we get more exposure for our brand globally, and there will be a few new things coming along the way, but we have a lot in the locker now.
Yeah, just one anecdote again and the feedback. One day I was walking on the Upper East Side and this bus came by with the Drumshanbo gin emblazoned the whole way across it. And of course, this is a bus that goes all the way out to the Hamptons for the weekend. And I just stopped and I said, that's freaking genius, because that is the core market for this product. So did you have your hands on that, or was that your distributor?
It was our distributor, but obviously we had our hands on it too. But that's the Jitney, and it's a very famous bus line out to the Hamptons. Yeah, and that just created a lot of energy and excitement for the brand in New York and allowed us then to show that around the world. So we got a lot of recognition. But that's a very famous bus journey in the summertime.
one of my favorite parts of the tour was that kind of crazy laboratory you have set up. It reminded me of that kind of naturalist cabinet that people used to keep in the Victorian era, sort of natural oddities mixed in with all the ingredients that go into the gin. Spend time there poking around.
I do spend time poking there, and not as much as I would like to, but yes, I do. And there's lots of memorabilia in there from my travels, and we're adding new things all the time. But yeah, I do spend time there, but hopefully I can spend more time as the market settles down.
And when it does settle down, and as you do have a little chance to sample some of your products, how do you like to enjoy the gin?
To be honest, it really depends on the mood and where I am, and it might be the weather, but I love Negronis. That's the one, that's probably my favorite. I'm still a gin and tonic person, but I'm open to all sorts of cocktails and ideas. We have a number on the team here that are always coming up with new ways, and we're travel, and a lot of the new ways are actually not created by me, but by bartenders around the world.
Do you have a special twist on a Negroni? I like them too.
No, not really. I just chilled, so it's not too sweet. Big ice cube.
Sometimes the classic is best, right?
Yep. Agreed.
We'd like to say thank you to PJ Rigney for sitting down with us. We're delighted to have visited the Shed. It's one thing to drink the product, but for those that are passionate about the product, it's been well worth our energy and effort to come here and get the full experience. So it's been a total delight. You, your staff is just astonishing, and the attention to detail is really impressive. So for me, it's a masterclass in branding. And
thank you, and it's an honor for us to have you visit from the States, and we hope to see you again.
Absolutely. Hope to see you in New York sometime too.
Absolutely.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
In our final episode, Off the Beaten Craic here, we saw some great dedication involved in reviving that failed food business into the booming food hub, which is giving all kinds of new opportunity to people in the community, increasing economic vitality. And of course, their immediate next door neighbor, the Shed Distillery, another example of dedication and commitment to an idea that is really bringing untold benefits to Drumshanbo and to County Leitrim in general. And Martin, my takeaway from our experience in the Midlands, I've said it a few times, but I'm going to say it one more time. And I'm looking right now, going back through the 13 episodes we've had in this series, and each one of them to me speaks to that idea of commitment to community. People working on projects in various ways that strengthen the community, strengthen the ties to the history of their area, and strengthen the economic viability going forward. Very, very impressed with those stories that all seem to shine in our episode. Commitment to community.
Yeah, and I think my takeaway after those 13 episodes was a feeling of incredible warmth. And of course, Ireland prides itself on that warmth and that welcome, that Céad Míle Fáilte, the 100,000 welcomes. But the other big takeaway is that tourism in Ireland doesn't have to be donut tourism, as Noel Carberry told us when we were out on the Cllr Trackway. Tourism in the heartland provides extraordinary opportunities to engage with communities maybe that are not so commonly visited. And there is a wealth of beautiful things to see. So it doesn't always have to be coastal in Ireland. There are opportunities to drink great whiskey and great gin, eat great food, and visit some of the most beautiful spots that I've encountered in the country. So, in my view, our Off the Beaten Craic experiment was a total delight, and we hope some of our listeners out there get to experience a similar trip to Ireland.
So as we bid fond farewell, we want to thank the people who made this trip possible. The Leitrim County Council really came through for us. David Minton, Director of Services, Sinead McDermott, Tourism Officer, and massive thanks to Joseph Gilhooly, the Chief Executive, who really helped us put this thing together.
And also, we have to say a big thank you to our travel partner, Tourism Ireland, who kindly helped us bring these 13 episodes to you. And if you're planning to visit Ireland, there's no better place to start your search for a great Irish trip than Ireland.com. A big thank you to our media partner, Irish Central, who have done a stellar job in spreading the word about this Off the Beaten Craic road trip. For all things Irish, please visit irishcentral.com. And now that the Off the Beaten Craic road trip has drawn to a close, we pay a return visit to the Capital Irish Film Festival, hosted by Solas Nua down in Washington, D.C. For more episodes on Irish film, make sure you're subscribed to the Irish Stew podcast so you don't miss any of our great upcoming episodes. Irish Stew is produced by John Lee, Martin Nutty, and Bill Schultz. Editing, mixing, and mastering by Bill Schultz. Music on Irish Stew was composed and performed by Rosa Nutty, with Donald Bowens on drums, Cllr Enda on bass and synthesizer. For more on Rosa Nutty's music, please visit rosanutty.com.